When the month changes from June to July, you already know the NBA world is about to be in a frenzy, because that's the transition that marks the beginning of the league's free agency period, and as always, this year has not disappointed. Immediately when the period began, we saw signings getting finalized left and right, which sure is curious based on the league's tampering rules, but that's neither here nor there. And with the moves that have been made, quite a few of them have been head-turning. A few teams came away with absolute steals with the value they signed players for, while others committed some gross overpays, and that brings us to today's video. Today we'll be going through the 3 best and 3 worst signings from the opening day of free agency, based on the amount of money that they signed for, the length of the contract, and their fit with their new team or current team. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but also very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll start things off with one of the 3 best signings from the first day of free agency, being Kyrie Irving's return to the Dallas Mavericks on a 3-year contract worth $126 million. Kyrie Irving was arguably the biggest name and best player available on the open market this summer, and ever since the Mavericks traded for him, there have been question marks and doubts about whether or not Irving would even stick around past the end of the season. With his looming free agency, that trade was definitely a huge risk, and the fact that the Lakers were flirting with Irving for a few months, being heavily linked with a potential return with him and LeBron James teaming back up again, that had to have been making those Dallas fans even more uneasy about the situation. But not only did Dallas retain him, they did so on a very reasonable and team-friendly contract. Keep in mind, Irving was eligible to be paid a 5-year contract up to $272 million, and the assumption by many analysts and insiders following the situation was that Dallas was going to have to offer up that kind of lucrative long-term deal to keep him, but in the end, Irving settled for a shorter 3-year contract for a much more reasonable $42 million annually, and now they have their elite backcourt duo of him and Luka Doncic locked in, so the focus can shift to finding pieces to put around them. Now, for the first of the 3 worst signings from the opening day, we have Fred VanVleet signing with the Houston Rockets for 3 years worth $130 million total. After we just finished discussing Kyrie Irving's contract, the fact that we're now flipping over to a player who is at least 1 tier below Irving as a player being paid more money than Irving in the same time frame left me and likely many of you baffled. Fred VanVleet is a champion who definitely contributed in a big way to the 2019 Raptors team that went all the way, and he was an all-star in 2022, but this past season he took a noticeable step backwards, shooting below 40% from the field and just 34% from 3, both being well below league average, and on top of that, his defense that was once pretty great also took a noticeable step backwards last season as well. I made a video about a month ago discussing players that I thought lost themselves money this season with their play, and I included Fred VanVleet in it, because based on how he played this year, I really did not believe that he would warrant an offer close to a max contract, but the Houston Rockets clearly disagreed with me. On top of my confusion over how he ended up with a bigger contract than Kyrie Irving, I'm also not the biggest fan of his fit in Houston after the team literally just drafted Amen Thompson, who is also a point guard, so now they'll likely be reducing their top 5 picks role early on. Overall, VanVleet is a tough, crafty point guard who facilitates well and does possess the ability to generate his own offense, but he's very hot and cold, and the move feels like a reach for the Rockets. The next one up in the best signings column is Draymond Green re-signing with the Golden State Warriors for 4 years and $100 million. The direction of the Warriors arguably came down to this one single decision. Everyone within the Warriors organization, whether it be Coach Steve Kerr, their GM, or anyone else, was very vocal about the fact that they did not believe that they would be able to stay in contention moving forward if Draymond left, and they're probably right. Green has been at the core of this team's dynasty from the very beginning as a rock on defense who has been one of the best players on that end of the floor for the last decade, and offensively, his chemistry with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson as a passer and facilitator, screen setter, and secondary ball handler, has been what makes the offense run as smoothly as it does. The Sacramento Kings were reportedly ready to throw a big bag his way this summer as well, and if Draymond were to leave for Sacramento, then the Warriors would have been in trouble. But getting him back for a reasonable $25 million per year keeps their window of contention alive, at least until the end of Steph Curry's contract, which expires in 3 seasons. Now back over to another one of the worst signings of the day. We have Jeremy Grant re-signing with the Portland Trail Blazers for 5 years and $160 million. Jeremy Grant did have a good season last year, but his numbers were pretty empty alongside Damian Lillard, as the Blazers ended the year as one of the most disappointing squads in the league, not even making the play-in tournament. This summer, Damian Lillard made it clear that the team needed to be more aggressive, taking swings to bolster the roster around him, but I don't think giving Grant this much money for as long as they guaranteed was what he had in mind. And then, of course, following that, news officially confirmed that that was what broke the camel's back, because Damian Lillard has officially requested a trade, and all of the drama surrounding his situation seems to be ready to conclude soon. The Blazers will likely be rebuilding starting this year once a Lillard trade gets completed, which then makes this Grant signing look even stranger in hindsight. And now for the final of the 3 best signings of the day, we have Josh Richardson signing with the Miami Heat for 2 years and $6 million total. This was easily, in my opinion, the best value signing of the day, as Josh Richardson is returning to the team that drafted him and got the best years out of him early on in his career. Richardson had a few down years after leaving Miami in Philadelphia and then Dallas, but the last 2 years he's actually gotten back on track while flying under the radar, playing in Boston, San Antonio, and New Orleans. The Heat didn't have much money to spend at all this offseason, so being able to find a genuinely impactful rotation player on a bargain was not going to be easy, but Richardson is exactly that and more. His perimeter shooting has shown some very solid improvement in the last few years, shooting 39% from 3 over the last 2 seasons, and he's a very solid perimeter defender. That, plus the fact that Coach Erik Spoelstra is familiar with his game and knows how to get the most out of him, makes this a reunion worth taking note of for the defending Eastern Conference champions. And finally, the last of the 3 worst signings of the day we'll be discussing is Desmond Bane getting a contract extension with the Memphis Grizzlies for 5 years and $207 million. Listen, I love me some Desmond Bane, and think he's one of the more underrated wing players in the league today, but this is an outrageous amount of money to spend on a guy who I'm not sure will ever reach the all-star tier in the league. This is the kind of money being paid to guys like Kawhi Leonard, Damian Lillard, Jimmy Butler, and Anthony Davis. And no offense to Desmond Bane, but he's not in the same stratosphere as those guys. I'm not even fully convinced that the Grizzlies were bidding against anyone else here, either, because I can't imagine other teams would be jumping out of their seats to pay Bane about $42 million annually when he hit free agency. And again, if they were, then Bane would have been a restricted free agent anyway, so the Grizzlies could have just matched the offer and retained him then. Rushing to pay the absolute most for someone who is a good, efficient secondary star, but not a superstar, definitely feels like a pretty big overpay. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below which signings you thought were the best and worst so far. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.